Welcome to Ecclesia Principles, a biblical strategy for believers to engage in God's design for government with Ray Eppard.
Hello, glad you could join us again today. This week, in celebration of the 4th of July and our independence, we're looking at particularly the second paragraph. We're not going to get to all of it, but we're looking at some of the biblical basis of the Declaration of Independence. And we've looked at a few things so far, and let's go ahead and read that second paragraph. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. We talked about that on Monday. And that they're endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. We talked about the process of how we got those unalienable rights on Tuesday, the 4th of July. And then that among these unalienable rights, not a full list, but here's three of them, are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And so with that brings us up to the next phrase, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. Now, at this point, again, we've referenced this a few times over the course of time, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men. I can remember several years ago, and this was a moment that really set me on the path to studying some of the things that we've been talking about, the Ecclesia Principles. This was a moment in time. I wouldn't say it was an aha moment, because that would make it seem like I understood something. But for lack of a better phrase, there's a phrase of, you know what you know. Some people know what they don't know, and others don't know what they don't know. And with this, there was an aspect one day, it was around the 4th of July, and I was hearing the Declaration of Independence, and I was processing the different statements that were being made. And when it got to this part particularly, some on the other things we've talked about, but to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men. When I heard that, all of a sudden I just realized, no, that's not true. Governments are not instituted to protect rights. Most governments throughout the history of man have been dictatorships, monarchies. It's just been tyrants. Governments that were set up were typically designed to protect the rights of whoever was in power. And I'm like, for them to make this statement that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, I thought, well, what are they talking about? Where do they get that idea? Where did they get it? They did not get it from history. And so I began to do some looking at things. And through all of this, with some of the unalienable rights and different things, realizing they're saying, God gave these to us. It's actually the God of the Bible was the insinuation at that point. And I realized something. Our founding fathers studied the Bible differently than I do. The founding fathers studied the Bible differently than anybody I know, because I didn't see a lot of these things. And then I found out when God instituted civil government, which was basically Genesis 9:6. The first murder, Cain killed Abel. If you'll recall, God put a mark on Cain, and there was a threat of punishment from God if anyone did harm to Cain. That always perplexed me. Why in the world did God protect Cain? Doesn't make any sense. But then I began to, again, I started digging into this, and I realized God established jurisdictions. he had self-government, he had family government. That was the only two things they had at that time. God had not authorized anyone besides himself to mete out punishment. Now, here's the thing. We are living in a time where there's a push to basically reduce crime by not calling things crime. That people do it, well, no, we're not going to worry about that. That's not a problem. And there's some things that probably would be good if they did it. But there's this whole push to basically not enforce any punishment on people. That's a whole concept here that we're dealing with. I mean, especially over the last number of years, just a number of states, and I live in Virginia, and here in Virginia, our state government allowed a lot of people out of prison. And I'm talking about even those who committed violent crimes, murder, rape, so forth and so on. Now, there's some, I think, okay, well, maybe reduce some of that. But these violent crimes puts it in a whole nother thing. But they're just like, well, we need to let them out. We need to let them out. And a lot of it comes down to, well, it's costing us a lot of money to do this. That's really where a lot of it comes down to. So in other words, we want to save money for the government, so we're going to put your life at risk. That's really what it boils down to. But I thought, well, again, going back to this, God protected Cain. The first time he gave the authority to mete out punishment was Genesis 9:6, when he said, if someone takes someone's life, then by man their life can be taken. That was the institution of civil government. Now, look at life from Cain all the way up to the flood. What happened when there was no protection of rights outside of the judgment of God? What happened was the evil in the world got worse and worse. It got to the point that in Genesis chapter 6, it says the thoughts of men's hearts were evil continually. There was nothing curbing it. Civil government, one of the designs of civil government is to curb sin. That's what it's for, particularly sin in the sense of violating the rights and hurting other people. That is what government is to do. It is to be a wall against those activities and a threat of punishment in that regard. So when the founders here in the Declaration of Independence said that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, I realized the only place that was true prior to the founding of America was in the Bible. God did it. Their basis for this statement was Scripture. God in Genesis 9:6 instituted civil government for the protection of people's rights. That's why God gave government. That's why, again, he starts off with, in the second paragraph, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal and are endowed by their Creator. And that basically they're following that line of thought, and government should fit the purpose that God gave it. Government should fit that purpose. It should secure, got tongue-tied there a little bit, it should secure the rights of people. That is one of its primary purposes, along with, defending us against our enemies and so forth, and providing for the tranquility of the people, but securing our rights. Governments are instituted among men. And notice it says deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. You see, again, going with the idea and the concept of government, God is sovereign. He had all power, he had all right, he had all authority. But then he made us. In Genesis 1:26, he said, let us make man in our image and after our likeness. Let them have dominion. Dominion. The first level of dominion or first jurisdiction he created was self-government. Then he made Eve. Then there became a family government. Then the next thing down was civil government. If you would, God gave some of his dominion to humanity as individuals. Individuals give their dominion, their authority, their jurisdiction to form families. And then we as individuals and families give of our dominion to form a civil government. See, God, individual, family, civil government. It derives its just powers. Its just powers. In other words, when it is functioning the way that it should function, those powers, those authorities are derived from the consent of the governed. That we're coming together. Again, it's almost like marriage. When two people get married, then it's like, hey, we're going to live together. We're going to form a life together. We're going to raise a family. We're going to do these things together. And part of all of that is I'm going to put some of my individual stuff aside. You put some of your individual stuff aside, because now we're working together as a unit. That's that basic concept. And when it comes to civil government, then we as individuals, we as families, then we kind of lay aside some of our stuff for civil government to work. In other words, with this, again, we are not authorized to take out revenge. God hasn't given us that authority. But at that point, we're going to consent to this government over here to deal with it. Now, it's deriving its power from those governed. In other words, it's monitoring our activity with each other, but it's deriving its power from here. So there's times we will have to look at it and say, no, you're functioning out of bounds. No, you're not doing this properly. And all those things come as a result of the sin nature. But government, again, God gave his dominion to individuals. Individuals give part of their dominion to create families, and then individuals and families give some of their dominion to create a civil government. It derives its just powers from the consent of the governed. Now, with this, he goes on to say that whenever government of any form, whenever any form of government becomes destructive to these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it and to institute new form of government. Again, it's this thing of supervision. Here's civil government. It is accountable to the people. This is God's design, because this gets its powers from the jurisdictions above it. It goes down. And therefore, the people here have the right to alter it. Now, the thing of it is, right now, those down here have created some rules to kind of entrench themselves. Those rules need to go away. God bless you. See you tomorrow.